if you've ever had to design something to promote your upcoming speeches, then you're aware that in design, there's a right way to design and a wrong way to design. And I knew that. I knew there's a right way to design and a wrong way to design. So when it came time to create a little poster for my upcoming speech, I wanted to do it right. Not feeling, just wanted to do it right. So I started to study and find out, what's the right way to do design? How do people design things? Ever wondered that? How do people design things? Well, it turns out there's a simple 4-step process all designers use. In fact, when I looked into it, I discovered this process is used all the way across. And I learned a lot about how to design things. How to design the picture so it looked right. How to design the poster so it attracted attention, get people in. And as looking at this poster and all these great design things, all of a sudden it started to become more clearer and clearer that all the design skills you use to create a good poster are also all the design skills you use to create a good speech. Now the letters that you need to remember for good design and good speech design, good poster design, good speech design, are the same letters. It's C-A-R-P. C-A-R-P. Now in taking a look through the things online about design, they arrange the letters a little bit differently. However, I want to make sure that this program doesn't become problematical with the censors. Don't want to get censored. Don't want to have anything that people say is nasty words being used, that sort of thing. So I'm going to stick with C-A-R-P. If you want, you can arrange the letters a different way, but for me it's going to be C-A-R-P, which by the way spells carp, which is a type of fish. So if you want to remember how to do good design, just remember C-A-R-P. Or just remember, think about fish, and think about C-A-R-P, and that'll help you understand good design, how good design works. So what I'm going to call the CARP process. Use the CARP process when developing and building and creating your speech. And the CARP process steps you through 4 basic principles. Now these principles don't exactly build on each other, but they do kind of reinforce each other. As you understand more about one principle, and you understand the second principle, you can see how the second principle helps reinforce and go better together with the first principle. As you get all the way through the CRP process, you can see all these things kind of go together and kind of interconnect to work together as one. So it's not a matter of process steps, it's just these are 4 things to keep in mind when you're designing a poster, or a video, or even your speech. And if you don't keep these things in your mind, your speech will be kind of, it won't quite work and you won't know why. You just get a sense there's something not right about this speech. But if you do keep these simple 4 things in your head when you're designing the speech, the C-A-R-P, the CARP, then your speeches will go a lot simpler, easily, more effectively, and you discover that it'll take a lot less time to produce really good speeches, and you'll get new ideas about how to create speeches just by thinking about these 4 basic design principles. So today, you're going to find out how to use the CARP process in your speech. Letter in the CARP process is C. And the C part of this process is very important. And in fact, it's the thing in your speech sometimes that can have the difference between people coming to your speech and not coming to your speech, between being aware of what you're doing and not being aware of what you're doing. The C principle is the basic foundation of the marketing and promotion of your speech, both before your speech gets going and while you're giving your speech. C is very important. Key design principle in designing projects, key design principle in designing your speech. Leave out the C and people don't know what the heck's going on. Put in the C, things become a lot clearer. And C is for contrast. Contrast. Just as in design, it's important to have good contrast. In other words, there has to be a way when you take a look at a poster to see what the different elements of the poster. The title should be very clear as opposed to the description. If the title and the description look the same, then people don't know, well, what's the title of what's going on and what's simply describing what's going on. The same thing with your speech. There has to be a contrast. And in this case, particularly in marketing, the contrast between why should people go to your speech and not go to some other speech? What makes your speech different? What makes your speech special? What is it about your speech that sets it apart? So when you're promoting, when you're developing your speech, it's always about what is it going to set us apart? Why people can go to a lot of different things, they got a limited amount of time, why should they go to your thing and not some other thing? Well, how do you contrast yourself with those other people who are doing speeches around you? Contrast is also useful inside your speech, so people understand when you're moving from one part to another. Contrast is especially useful in doing transitions. A transition is a way to make it clear, okay, there's something is changing from here to here. For instance, if you're doing a contrast in time, you could say something like, later on that day, or 5 years later, or once I finally understood that process and how that process worked, I was able to develop the second process and make sure that one worked as well. That's the contrast. Contrast between first and second, contrast between now and later, contrast in time, contrast through your speech. So you know, where's the introduction, where's the body, where's the conclusion? You do that by contrast, because those are three separate parts of your speech. And you want to make it clear when you go from the introduction to, okay, here's how I'm introducing things. Okay, here's the part which really pays attention. Here's how I'm wrapping it all up. Here's where we're wrapping everything up at the end. So introduction, body, conclusion is very important contrasts to get across. That's the power of the C, of the contrast. Once things are contrasted, people know what to focus on. So for instance, in design, you want the title to be big. Bigger than anything else on your page. So people know, that's what captures my attention. That's the title. I get it. And the same thing in your speech. You want that introduction to be big. Get people's attention. And once you get their attention, then you can start developing things, drawing things out a little bit in the body of your speech. You don't have to be as big and huge and dramatic as you do in the introduction as in the body. That's C for contrast. The next step in the CARP process is A. A is the opposite of contrast. While it is important in your speech to have different contrasts you go through, it's important also to understand where A fits into your speech. Same thing in design. Certain things you want to contrast, but certain things you want to use this A principle to make sure that the contrast isn't extreme. If everything's all different from everything else, then that can create confusion too. It's like, okay, what's going on here? It's all a bunch of stuff and I don't know what to focus on or where to concentrate. Same thing in your speech. If everything is just all over the place, people don't know what to focus on, where they really should pay attention. So A is very critical and very crucial. And the A part of your speech is for alignment. Alignment. Now in design, alignment literally means that things be in line. Quite often you'll see this in the case of text. Text can be either left aligned or right aligned or centered. The thing about centered text, it doesn't line up to the left or the right. It's not really in alignment. So some design people say don't use any centered text at all because it doesn't line up. You can't simply follow that line down. The reason the line is so powerful is once you have a line of text, it's a line. You can follow that line all the way down. And it's the same thing in speaking. Once you have some sort of alignment, people can follow you all the way down. So if, for instance, you're talking to people about alignment, everything in that section should be about alignment. You don't want to throw things that aren't about alignment into the section about alignment. People will get confused. Say, are we talking about alignment or are we not talking about alignment? I don't know what's going on here. So everything should be lined up all the way down. So you start talking about alignment, it's alignment all the way through that part of your speech. Similar alignment is in your introduction. If you mention at the beginning, going to talk about alignment, then somewhere in the speech, you have to talk about alignment. You have to align things up. Just as when design, you're looking at the text, it'll go all the way down the left side of the page or all the way down the right side of the page, and things will be lined up so you see them all together. A similar way in your speech, people should be able to see all the way down that section of your speech that everything there is about alignment. And when you mention, beginning, oh, I'm going to talk about alignment later, there is a section on alignment, is a section there that focuses on alignment. So just by thinking about the principle of alignment and being aware of that in your speech, you can eliminate some problems. Common problem that many speakers have is they have speeches that go all over the place because it isn't aligned. They'll talk about this and they'll talk about that and they'll talk about another thing, and it creates a problem. You see this type of speech, particularly given by small children, very small children, at the age of 5 or 6. You say, well, I went to the store, and then I went to the tree, and then I went to see my friend, and the next day I bought a Pepsi, and then I went off to... There's no alignment. You're all over the place. It's all contrast. No alignment. So to make sure your speeches hold together, remember the A of alignment in the CARP process. So far, you have contrast and alignment, kind of opposite things. Opposite things that sort of go together. The R part of the CARP process doesn't really have to do with contrast or alignment. It's something different, but it's something very important. It's key to making sure that the audience gets what you're saying. Some speakers have a problem in getting the audience to understand what the heck they're talking about. And audiences leave those speeches thinking, what was talked about? They'll ask their friends, what do you think he was talking about? I don't know, what do you think he was talking about? I have no clue. And nobody in the audience knows what was going on. And that's because the R part is missing. R part is very important in speeches. And the R part of the CARP process is repetition. Repetition. In design, repetition is very important. Repetition lets the person viewing your poster or your video know what's important. You repeat these things over, over, and over, and over again because that's what's important. Whatever theme you have running through your presentation, whatever theme you have running through your poster, the audience sees that again and again and say, oh, that's what I should focus on. I get it. Fantastic. So in addition to contrast and alignment, repeating things is very, very important. Because unlike with a book, where a person can read it as many times as they want to get it, your audience has one chance to understand what you're saying. You're standing up in front of people, the person has one chance to get what you're saying. And so the more times you repeat, the more times you use repetition, the more chances they have to understand what the heck you're talking about. For example, if you're talking about, repetition, you might want to say repetition a few times in your speech to make sure people say, this is about the repetition of the CARP process. I get it. Fantastic. Okay, contrast, alignment, now we're talking about repetition. By repeating that, people get it, and it begins to sink in. So with your speech, take a look through. Are you repeating your main point over and over again? Or you just kind of mention it once and hope that people remember? Some speakers just say it once. And by the time you get to the end of the speech, they say, and that's why it's so important. And I think, what's important? I have no clue what was supposed to be important. What's important, what's not important? Or maybe they repeat it all at the end, but it doesn't stick. It's like, they said something at the end about what it was, but I don't remember it. Repetition. It's a simple, powerful technique you can use. By repeating your ideas, your main thoughts, all the way through your speech, everything really becomes a lot clearer. So when you're going through your speech, find out how many repetitions you have. Count. If you repeat your idea just twice, well, that means people have literally 2 opportunities to know what the heck you're talking about. If you say it 3 times, then you have 3 times. But if you say it 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 times, it sinks in. People get the point. And it sinks in, they start to understand it. Start to think about it. There are many different ways you can use repetition, not only in words, but in themes. If there's a theme going through your speech, great. Use that theme. Keep repeating it. Remember that third part of the CARP process of repetition. And the last part of the CARP process has nothing really to do with contrast or alignment or even repetition. It's very powerful, very important. It's the P part of the CARP process. And it's something about helping people understand. As you go through, contrast can help people understand things. But even more importantly is this P principle. In design, it's used to focus the attention on a certain area of the poster, focus attention on a certain area of your video, focus attention on a certain part of your presentation. It focuses the attention in. Gets that attention in because of the way the P principle works and the power it has. And the P, the final part of the CARP process, is proximity. Proximity. Now that's a big word. Big, fancy word. And maybe they only use the word proximity so they have a P and you'd have some sort of a word. Oh, CAR, we need a P. Okay, here's CARP. Great, fantastic. Proximity, sounds good. But proximity is simply a fancy word with how near something is to something else. That's all it means. So how close is something, how near is something to something else? So if something is like this, it's in close proximity. Something like that, it's in far proximity. Near proximity, far proximity. And the proximity principle is so powerful because it helps people focus on things. And when you're doing a speech, if you have the things that matter close together, then that helps. So proximity is very important and very powerful. Giving a speech through and you're talking about proximity. So when you have an example about proximity, you want that to be in the proximity section. You want to have that near to what you're talking about. In design, it's pretty straightforward. If you're designing a poster, you've got a picture of something, then the words describing the picture should be close to the picture. In a speech, if you're describing something, then the phrase describing that should be close to the example you give. So anytime I'm talking about proximity, it should be in the proximity section. Those examples should be in the proximity section. If I'm talking about contrast, don't want to bring in a lot of examples about proximity in the contrast section. And some speakers do that. They'll start talking about one thing, and all of a sudden they'll bring examples of something else, and then try to bring your attention back to the one thing, and it just gets really confusing. So go through your speech. Take a look at proximity. What's near? Where are your examples near? Are they near to your point you're trying to make an example of? Or do you make a point and the example's way, way down here? Here's my point, and then somewhere down here I'm going to talk about some example. No. Proximity. Keep things near. Keep things close by. Make sure that proximity happens. It's a simple, powerful principle in your speeches to make sure they get the effect. Because when you have the example close to what you're talking about, then people know, that's it. It becomes a big chunk. They get it, they understand it. It's the power of the fourth and final part of the CARP process, proximity. The same principles you use in design, you can use in your speeches. Just as with design, you go through the CARP process, you do the same thing with your speeches. In design, contrast is very important. Contrast is important so people can clearly see on your poster or your presentation what are the main parts of the presentation. In a similar way, contrast is very important in your speeches. It has to be clear. Where's your introduction? Where's your body? Where's your conclusion? Where does your conclusion start? Most importantly, where does your conclusion end? Keep in mind the contrast. How do people keep separate the different parts of your speech so it's clear and they get it very quickly? And alignment. Alignment is important in design, either left align or right align, so everything lines up on the page and it easily scans down the page and sees things. Alignment is very important in your speech to make sure your points are lined up. To make sure there's some alignment between what you're talking about in the introduction and what you talk about in the body of your speech. When you have a conclusion, it should wrap up all the things you're talking about, not introduce new things, because that would be out of alignment with your talk. I've got 3 things to talk about today. You've heard about 3 things. That's alignment. And alignment helps people follow what you're going on. If you talk in the beginning, I've got 3 points, make sure you have 3 points in your speech. Each of them very clear and easy to find. That's the power of alignment. And the third part of the CARP process, repetition. Repetition. Repeat, repeat, repeat. Because you've got one chance to get this idea across to your audience. Just one. The more times you repeat your ideas, the more times you can go over, the more times you make it clear that this is what I'm talking about, the better off you are. If you repeat it once, your audience has one shot to get your point. You repeat it twice, they've got 3 shots. Actually, repeat. Repeat once, you got 2 shots. Repeat twice, you got 3 shots, and so on. The more you repeat, the more the audience says, oh, I understand what you're talking about. I get it. Repeating is important because people forget things very quickly. I read something, I think it said 10% of what you talk about will be retained. And that's if the audience is really paying attention. 10%. So to make sure they retain something, repeat, repeat. Make sure you repeat. And the final part of the CARP process, proximity. Proximity. Make sure that, just as in design, you want to keep the picture next to text describing the picture, next to the person who's supposed to be in the picture. You want to keep all that in close proximity, near to each other. So in your speech, you keep things near to each other. If you're going to talk about a certain point, make sure the example is close to that point. So people know that, oh, okay, that's an example of that point. So keep things in close proximity. That will help focus people's attention. Well, that's the point you get across. I get it. Because it's near there. It's in proximity to it. Makes sense. If you give a speech and you've got a point, your example's way over here, that's a problem. So give the speech and have your example very close proximity. That'll make sure people understand what you're talking about and what is important for them to focus on. And there you have it. The CARP way to create a great speech. So, next time you've got a speech to create, just design a great speech using the CARP process.